and it's basically an advisory support online in sort of one-to-many and one-to-one training sessions, but it's aimed at helping businesses develop a net zero carbon strategy. This has only just kind of come out, so more information via the Worcestershire Business Central telephone line, and that's for Worcestershire businesses only, I'm afraid. We've got a couple of events coming up that might be interested in. One on the 3rd of Feb that's about innovation, so that's about developing new products and services that are going to save greenhouse gas carbon emissions in some way, shape or form. And there's one on the 25th of February that's basically about the various green related grants that are available. And I think that's just Worcestershire as well. We'll circulate those details, so don't worry about having to write those Eventbrite address down. So today we're talking about making the switch to electric vehicles. Yeah, and this is a kind of technology that's probably, you know, really only just a few recent years made the leap from the sort of quirky oddity. You know, for quite a long time we've seen the odd electric car around, and maybe a few more hybrids appearing, but you know, it's really sort of jumped to the sort of mainstream, I would say, over the last couple of years. And that sort of demonstrated no better than, you know, what we've seen of the rise of Tesla, you know, founded 17 years ago now, valued at $805 billion, you know, sort of bigger than most of its established competitors, you know, massive. And that's only making 500,000 cars so far a year. So clearly that's people betting that this is going to be, you know, a much bigger thing in the future. And we've seen, you know, one of the co-owners, Elon Musk, he's in the headlines all the time. But recently, he edged Jeff Bezos as the world's richest man. I think he's dropped down a bit as the Amazon and Tesla share prices change a bit. They kind of, you know, exchange positions as being on paper valued at the sort of richest person in the world. So yeah, so that demonstrates it. So just a couple of details. Basically, if you've got any questions that come to mind during the presentations, then please post them in the written chat function, and we'll basically pick them up at the end. Or if the speakers want to, they'll you know, answer them there and then. And basically, the session is being recorded as well. So if you've got a problem with that, maybe don't do your video and, you know, obscure your name or something. So here's a rough agenda. So we've basically got Tony Machin from Cenex. He's going to talk a bit more, mainly focus on the sort of mechanics of, you know, what the vehicles can do. And we're really focusing on cars and vans this time around because, you know, just because of the time we've got. And then Chetwynd Jarvis will talk about basically installing charging infrastructure, particularly in a sort of workplace setting. And then Richard Fraser will talk about, you know, the sort of the finance and the economics of it. And then we've got a bit of time for questioning at the end. So without further ado, I will hand over to Tony. I'll stop sharing.
Okay. Is that come up okay? Okay. Everyone see the slides? Yep, ready to go? So I'm Tony Machin. I'm from Cenex, and really just today, really just a bit of a fairly light touch, because I think a lot of people varying degrees of knowledge around electric vehicles, and I think, you know, the likes of ourselves, we can make assumptions that we assume everybody knows what electric vehicles are and how they work, and considerations in terms of incorporating them within your business. So I've kept this fairly light touch. I'm not technical myself, so I'll leave that up to our technical experts back in our team. So I'm sort of providing a bit of an overview that hopefully probably only just starts to scratch the surface in 20 minutes, but I think hopefully provides you with enough you know, good starting point for further discussion and starting to think about, you know, possible journeys in terms of integrating electric vehicles into your business fleets. So I work for Cenex. In a previous life, I've also worked for a couple of years for Nissan, working closely with their corporate sales team, specifically a non-sales role, engaging with primarily public sector to promote awareness and education around electric vehicles. that was going back to 2014. So that's 6 years ago now, when it was really sort of, the technology was pretty much in its infancy, and it was but certainly has provided me with a good insight as to sort of the challenges in terms of incorporating electric vehicles on fleets. A little bit about Cenex and who we are. So Cenex was established in 2005 as the UK's first centre of excellence for low carbon and fuel cell technologies, and essentially we're a commercial organisation, and we work closely with both public and private sector clients, helping them make that transition to sort of zero emission transport, and that's through both collaborative R&D projects and also commercial consultancy. That's across both transport and energy. We've got 2 specialist teams. We also provide accredited training. We disseminate our projects formally. We also facilitate stakeholder workshops and engagements. We've got offices in Amsterdam, South Korea now. We've actually got an office there, albeit I've never been there, and up in Scotland. Some of you might also realise we run the low carbon vehicle event as well, which is the UK's premier low carbon vehicle event to sort of showcase the latest technology. Obviously, that was held back in November this year, and unfortunately, for obvious reasons, that had to be in an online format. Hopefully, we'll go back to a face-to-face exhibition next year. And we're independent, so we're not tied into any manufacturers. So the advice we provide is fully independent, and it's not favouring anyone who pays the most money and favouring one technology. We're not for profit. We don't have shareholders. So although we're commercial, we generate enough income just to wash our face. And being around since 2005, we like to think we know what we're talking about. So onto electric vehicles, just to provide a little bit of context. So most of you are probably aware with the government issuing their Road to Zero strategy, which has now changed, and recently issued the notification that the ban on sales of internal combustion engine cars and vans is now targeted at 2030. So that puts a real focus on how things need to move forward. We'll see things in the press about the concerns over sort of air quality and talk around implementation of clean air zones, albeit COVID has obviously changed some of the landscape around that. Road transport accounts for 27% of the UK's CO2 emissions, and it's also a major source of nitrogen oxide, NOx, and also particulates, and obviously there are issues there in terms of public health. Electricity generation as well is actually becoming increasingly sustainable, so increasingly sourced from some renewable sources. A quick example there, Q2 last year, nearly 50% of the electricity was generated from renewable sources. That's only going to get better as time moves on. And the share of the market in terms of electric vehicles is increasing very quickly, albeit probably aware, we're starting from a fairly low point, but in December alone, 16.5% of new car sales were battery electric vehicles. So that's really starting to shift the needle. And you'll find there's lots of common myths around electric vehicles, and obviously having been in the industry for about 6 years, a lot of these become commonplace. And to be fair, some of them, if people who are just starting out and not aware of what an electric vehicle is, they're probably some of these are probably correct. So they're slow. How often do you have to replace the battery? There's not much choice. They're very expensive. Must be really hard to maintain. No residual values. The batteries will end up in landfill. The grid won't cope. The electricity network will fall over whenever everyone plugs their car in, and wouldn't want to drive it through a car wash or get electrocuted. So all of these sort of observations. So we'll come on and address most of those as we go along. So a quick overview of what a battery electric vehicle is. It's essentially quite a straightforward animal. It's the energy you plug it in, charges the battery stores the energy, and that drives an electric motor drivetrain. It's actually very simplistic technology. There's probably about 3 moving parts on a drivetrain compared to thousands on an internal combustion engine. So actually, there's actually very little for it to go wrong. Service and maintenance is easier. You've got regenerative braking, which puts power back into the battery, and that optimizes your range. Most importantly, there's 0 tailpipe emissions from an electric vehicle. You've probably heard of other ultra low emission vehicles. So there are other vehicle types, not fully battery. So we've got plug-in hybrids. So that's basically a battery and a internal combustion engine, and the two work in conjunction, but there's a much shorter range on a plug-in hybrid, and it also relies on you having to plug it in order to get the benefit from the battery and the electric motor. There's range extended, so that's basically an electric vehicle which has an additional small internal combustion engine that generates power to boost the battery, and also what I think Toyota terms their self-charging vehicles. A little bit of a misdemeanor, but the hybrid electric, like a Toyota Prius, for example, that's purely using a small electric battery that the engine predominantly powers through braking, and that just supports the overall functions of the engine. In terms of a wholly electric range on that, it's very limited, probably no more than a mile, so they're not really for consideration. So really, in terms of battery electric vehicles, as I said, 0 tailpipe. Some of the key benefits of this is what we call lower whole life costs. So looking at the cost of the vehicle over the period that you operate it, and this starts to address that sort of question about, well, they're very expensive, but whether it's a leased or an outright purchase, you've got much reduced fuel costs, typically about 1/3 of that for petrol or diesel, much reduced service and maintenance costs, and also other financial benefits such as 0 vehicle excise duty. There's numerous models now, mainstream models, cars typically with 250 miles plus range with a 60 kilowatt battery. Some of the vans now do in excess of 100 miles. The battery warranties are typically 8 years, so there's no issues with battery reliability. There's over 150 models on the market already, cars and vans up to 3.5 tons, with more coming this year. The CO2 savings over what we call well to wheel, which is taking into account how the electricity is generated, and as what I said previously, that's only ever getting cleaner. Even taking that into consideration, it gives you savings of 50 to 70%. And if you're in London, they're exempt from the congestion charge, and also with clean air zones and ultra low emission zones coming in, these cars will be compliant. The government also give you some incentives. So there's a plug-in car grant. So there's £3,000 off the purchase price up to £50,000. There's a plug-in van grant that works up to an £8,000 reduction on list price. There's support as well with workplace charging. So the government will provide up to £350 currently per charging socket, up to 40 sockets in total, and that can be across more than one site. And also you've got the home charging scheme for anyone who's got off-street parking, gets a grant for up to £350 for installing a home charger. Without wanting to cut across Richard too much, there are some, sorry, just lost my thread there. Where are we gone? That's it. Tax and financial incentives, 0 benefit in kind for company car drivers currently. No Class 1A national insurance costs. There's a 100% first year capital allowance write down. In terms of advisory fuel rates, they're a lot lower, so benefits companies with employees doing business mileage, albeit probably not a lot at the moment, but that obviously gives them reduced costs. And there's also corporate tax advantages if the vehicles are leased. Also from a business point of view, from corporate social responsibility, these vehicles, if they're used for pool cars, ties in nicely with staff well-being. These cars are really nice to drive. They're easy to drive. They're quiet. Links in nicely with sort of broader social environmental benefits. So it's helping lower the carbon footprint of an organisation or company, and it's good PR. And generally, in terms of environmental, the generation of greenhouse gas emissions from electric vehicles is a lot lower than petrol equivalent, taking into account everything, and that's going to fall even further in line with ever cleaner electricity generation, and even taking into account the emissions from manufacturing. Battery electric vehicles are far less environmentally damaging than internal combustion engines, and batteries are recyclable and can be used for second life options such as battery storage. And again, just a very quick, and again, Richard probably go through some of this in a lot more detail. Just an example of, analysing this from a 36-month lease, 60,000 miles over a car, a Nissan Leaf compared to a Ford Focus petrol, even taking into account the higher initial cost. By the time you factored in fuel, reduced fuel costs, running costs, tax savings, you can see over 3 years the electric vehicle is more cost efficient than its petrol equivalent. Other considerations, obviously practicality. It's no just saying we're going to replace all our vehicles with electric. You've got to ensure that they're operationally suitable, and you can do it cost effectively. Not every there aren't electric vehicles for every option at the moment. It's getting better. Predominantly anything up to a 3.5 ton van is covered, but obviously some of the more specialist vehicles and larger vehicles, electric probably isn't the route to go, and other technologies are emerging. Even looking at reviewing duty cycles of the current fleet, that might be a way of aligning suitability for electric vehicles through to fleet reviews, something we do. So we'll look at a fleet, identify where electric vehicles would fit comfortably, taking into account cost of ownership and emission savings. That is based on data that's supplied, so that is key. Larger vehicle options are limited. Things like your workforce as well. So, buy into this is very, very important. A lot of companies now will provide vehicles on trial. That's an ideal opportunity to get your head around the technology and give different people a chance to drive them, to understand them, to see whether they can fit or not. Company car policy updates, training as well. It's all about how you drive these vehicles to get the best out of them, to improve their efficiency. Examples of companies whereby they've undertook training with employees in how they drive an electric vehicle increases the range and efficiency and of that vehicle by about 20%. So that's an interesting one. Nottingham City Council, just a quick example of some work we did with Nottingham City Council. They ran what was called a ULEV Experience scheme, and this was all around driving the uptake of electric vehicles in Nottingham. This was a government-funded programme that was sort of 3 streams really. We were helping provide fully funded fleet reviews. So again, that was identifying where electric vehicles could fit into existing fleets. Another company provided actual vehicles that could be loaned out to businesses on by over a month. So again, they could trial those vehicles through to sort of local business engagement events. So again, trying to get the business community to understand, be able to ask questions, have vehicles there and be able to try them, and that worked very well. And we did 16 fleet reviews for that, and across the different organisations, that immediately identified 450 vehicles that could be easily swapped to EVs with total cost of ownership savings of over £170,000, but more importantly as well, saving 900 tonnes of carbon dioxide. And as always goes in hand with EV, you've got to think about charging infrastructure. And again, I think this is probably something Emma's going to go through. So again, I don't wish to cut across Emma's bows, but far more options about where you can actually charge your vehicle. So like an internal combustion engine where you're filling up at the petrol station, you've got the options of home, you've got the options of work, on route, motorway and public charging, and also destination charging, supermarket, the pub. So in terms of charging infrastructure, there's lots of different types and speeds of charger, from 3-pin plug up to rapid chargers. Its key thing is about making sure that as a business or an organization, you're putting the right type of charger in the right place to maximize the best use and efficiency, and also to provide the most cost-effective solutions. Understanding supply requirements and capacities that might require liaison with what we call a district network operator, a DNO, such as Western Power. Costs. So again, the cost of charges varies tremendously, from simple 3.7 kilowatt chargers, what we call slow chargers, that can be anything from 1,000 to 1,500. Rapid chargers, you could be paying up to £50,000 to install a rapid charger, and it's not always the best solution. As I said before, home charging options, that's becoming increasingly viable, with software to enable chargebacks of electricity if it's home starts. And moving forward, things like smart charging, which helps manage load, which means that effectively, even if there is a supply constraint, by managing the charging in a smart way, you're actually increasing your headroom in terms of the capacity without having to go through the cost of upgrading your supply. And we're increasingly seeing as well solar PV and battery storage solutions, and also something we call vehicle to grid, which helps manage the load going into the car, but importantly using the car as a mini power station collectively to put power back into the grid and obtain the income from that. Together with that, also you've got public charging, so the number of public charging points is again increasing exponentially, but still a lot of work to do. So in summary, change is happening. My feeling is we're almost getting to a tipping point with electric vehicles. Hopefully you've seen that with the metrics that I've shown you, and battery electric vehicles are now perfectly viable alternatives to petrol and diesel cars and small, medium-sized vans. They're available now, and it's easily adoptable technology. The technology is continuing to improve at a rapid pace, so we're starting to see, the focus on hydrogen. Still probably a long way behind electric, and electric's not going to go away now. Hydrogen, I think, will come on in terms of the heavier HGVs, buses, marine, rail, even buses now. There are battery electric options. So it's all about horses for courses and the different technologies working together. And as you can see, lots of other considerations. It's not just about the vehicles, but just being able to understand that shouldn't be a barrier. And hopefully there's lots of help out there to help you start that journey. And then just in lieu, assuming the slides will get sent around at the end, there are a couple of areas there where you could, specifically around commercial vehicles, the couple of areas there where you can actually find out more and dig down into a lot more of the detail if required. And thank you for listening, and I'll hand back to Simon.
Thanks, Tony. We'll introduce.
I think I was on time by a minute.
Just introduce Emma Chetwynd Jarvis from Rock Power, who's going to tell us about charging infrastructure.
Helps if I unmute myself, doesn't it? There we go. Can everybody see my slides? Are they okay? Yeah? Good, good. Brilliant. Hi, everybody. I'm Emma. I'm from Rock Power Connections. We're electrical engineers, and I currently spend about 95% of my time on EV charging projects. Today, I'm just going to give a quick overview about installing EV charging infrastructure at your business. And when I talk about EV charging infrastructure, I'm talking about the chargers, but I'm talking about everything that's required to power them. So that can be as simple as coming from your existing supply, right through to needing a new electricity supply and a substation. But I'll come back to that. There we go. So, what am I going to cover off then? Well, it's not a very long time slot, so I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour, really. My details are at the end of this presentation. I'll happily talk to anybody about their specific situation. So if anybody wants to ever get in contact with me, please do. I'm happy to advise. But what I intend to cover off now is just looking at those different solutions for actually getting an electricity supply. Calculating your required load, this is just absolutely pivotal, and then just looking at a couple of extra points to consider there, and then how do you take it forward? So to start with, I'm going to give just a high-level overview of how you can actually power EV chargers. It tends to fall into three categories. So the simplest one that we have at the top there is from your existing supply. This tends to apply when you're just looking at putting in, you know, a few slow chargers, really. You might have spare capacity. If you do, and you've got the spare ways in your distribution board, then it really is a very simple process. If you're looking to put a few more chargers in, say some up to say a couple of rapid chargers, so you're looking around anything from 69 kVA up to generally around 200 kVA, then you're likely to need a new connection from the network. In this area, it's Western Power Distribution, and for that kind of load, they're likely to let you connect to their low voltage network. Once again, this isn't too difficult. This is effectively connecting to their network with a low voltage cable, going into a new supply, so a cutout and a distribution board, and just powering your chargers from there. You can have a new supply in specifically for your chargers, or you might decide that you also want to put your existing premise supply on that as well, which is fine. What you can't do is have two supplies from the grid into the same building. They won't let you do that. And then as supplies get bigger, maybe you've got big plans and you want to put a whole bank of chargers in, switch over your entire fleet, or put some of the rapid chargers in there. With the load requirement for that, Western Power are likely to give you a high voltage point of connection onto their network. So that requires you to have a substation on your site, and that substation you would then connect into like some kind of distribution system, such as an LV panel here. And then once again, that can then go off and power all your chargers. So just to put that into pictures, really, this here is, these kind of chargers here tend to be your 7, your 11, 22 kilowatts. These could just be powered from your existing distribution board. Literally, they take up a very, very small footprint, and you just have underground cabling through to those. That second example that I gave, when you come from the low voltage network, this is one that we've installed. The black box on the left here is what I call a feeder pillar. So that's where your connection comes into. You've got a cutout in there, you've got a meter, and then the cables go into the EV charger next to it, and that's a 50 kilowatt charger there. And then the next slide is, this is a substation. which is as glamorous as my life gets. But this substation here, I'm not showing it connected to any chargers, but you can imagine that next to it, you would have the feeder pillars next to it, and then the chargers. Effectively, the key point here is you can see that with each iteration that you go, you need more space. And it's going to cost you more. And that's why I always say that being able to determine what your load is so pivotal in all of this. So, what load do you require? I have conversations, so many clients, they're trying to work out how many chargers they need, what rating to go for. And some people will say, like, for example, I would like 3 22 kilowatt chargers. Now, each of those chargers might have 2 sockets on it, and each of those sockets might actually be able to pull 22 kilowatts. So suddenly you're looking at 44 kilowatts per charger instead. And when you look over 3 charges, you're suddenly in the realms of, say, like, 132 kilowatts. The numbers quickly grow. But will that realistically be used? If you over-engineer your load requirements, you're likely to be paying for a more expensive supply that you just don't need. So what I've put on here, this is just the list of questions that I like to talk through and ask people. What power of rating charges do you need? That table at the bottom, it's kind of roughly split into 3, your slow, your fast, your rapid. The way that I tend to see it at the moment is your slow, in my mind, tends to be your 7, your 11, 22, your rapid, your 50s, and then I'm also working in the realms at the moment of the ultra rapid, which is your 150 right through to your 350 that you're likely to see on the motorways. We're installing those as well at the moment. What we'll be charging, are we talking here about it being a commercial fleet? Is it the employee's own car? Is it visitors? And I mean, that could be visitors to your office. You might be a hotel and have like guests staying overnight. Or are you a business place that's looking at putting a charger in that's en route? Like the middle example that I gave back there, that one is at a pub. So they're looking for people to come charge, have a coffee, and then get on their way. When will they be charging? Are these charge points likely to be used during the day? Is it overnight parking? You might have a commercial fleet that's parked up overnight. How much charge do they need? Is this a commercial fleet that's on the road all day? Or is it your employees' cars that they're predominantly charging elsewhere, that they're most likely going to be charging overnight at home? Or, like I say, it could be that fleet that's coming back to the depot every night, and they've depleted 75% of the battery. So that's a critical one to think about. What turnaround time is needed? Are they parked up overnight, or is this something where you've got to get a vehicle back on the road within 30 minutes? And how many charging episodes are needed a week? So when you actually look at the vehicle and it charging, actually, it might only need to charge, say, once every 3 days, something like that. So that kind of gives you an idea, like, of how to work out how many chargers. You might decide to have some slower ones and some rapids, and to just kind of get your EV charging strategy. What are the extra points that you then need to think about when you try and calculate that into a load? The absolute key one for me is that your vehicle can only charge as fast as the battery will let it. Now, I've looked at a few commercial fleets, and the vehicles that I've looked at can generally only charge at 6 to 7 kilowatts. There might be others, and I stand to be corrected on that, but in those cases, regardless then of whether you put in a 7 kilowatt charger or an 11 kilowatt charger or 22 kilowatt charger, it's only going to draw at 7 kilowatts anyway. So if we go back to that 22 kilowatt charger with the 2 sockets, and you're looking at 44 kilowatts, actually that suddenly might be 2 lots of 7 instead, so only 14 kilowatts. And you're at a third of the load that you thought you needed. So that's a really critical one there. The second one is load management software, which is a very beautiful thing. Entirely kind of back end, you know, operated by somebody within your business just on their general laptop or whatever. You can program in the maximum load that can be pulled across all your chargers. This could be based on load sharing. You could even set priority bays. So if people pull up in those, that they will pull the majority of the load. You could also program shifts of charges as well. So if you know you've got to charge so many vehicles overnight, then what you can do, but you know that they're actually going to only take about 4 hours to charge, then for the first 4 hours, your first chargers could be used. Your next 4 hours, your next ones could be used. And what you're just doing there is phasing the use of electricity over that charging period. And it means that you can also reduce the total load that you need to install. Daytime versus nighttime load. If you're a big energy user during the day, but you're not overnight and you're going to be charging your vehicles overnight, then actually you probably don't need to upgrade your supply. You can operate within that, you're just using it at a different time of day. Timed connections, Western Power might be able to provide you to the load, but only on a timed connection. So for example, they might say, well, yeah, we've got that available, but you can only use it after 8 PM at night until 6 AM or something like that, something to be aware of. Diversity, once again, a wonderful thing. The DNOs like Western Power didn't let us apply it, but now they do. They understand it. It's not just like, realistically, are you going to have a charge plugged into that, pulling the full load 24/7? And if not, apply some diversity. And then the final point is, I guess, almost the opposite of that, and future proofing. So if you do have an EV charging strategy and you can very clearly see how you're going to grow the fleet in future years, if you're going to install a new connection, then for the cost of what you're installing, just make sure that you do cover off for future use, and you don't need to upgrade that supply again. And so my last slide then is, how do you take this forward? Well, once you have calculated what your load is, does it fit within your current spare capacity? If yes, and you have the spare ways on your distribution board, then you're absolutely laughing. It's just brilliant. It's nice and simple. Electricians can do that work. I'd ensure that they're NIC, EIC accredited. If you don't have spare ways on your distribution board, you might just need to upgrade that, but it's really quite simple. If you do decide that you need to either upgrade your supply or get a new connection in, then the first thing to do would be to apply to your distribution network operator. Around here, it's Western Power Distribution. They'll assess two things. First off, is that load available locally? And secondly, whether the network in your area can actually take the harmonics from the chargers. And they have quite a clever thing at the moment. They've got an EV heat map that you can access, and it will tell you whether the substations, the distribution substations in your area can actually handle more EV chargers on the network or not. So things like that are really quite clever right now. But that's what I said. It's a whistle-stop tour. I'm going to stop there. I didn't want to start droning on about substations if it really wasn't applicable to people. And I didn't want to go the other way. So like I say, my contact details are here. And if anybody wants to talk through their specific scenario, I'm more than happy to.
Thanks, Emma. And now introduce Richard Fraser from Your Finance Friend, who's going to tell us a bit more about the economics and the financing of it.
Brilliant.
Richard.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to share my screen. Bear with me 1 second. Hello, everyone. I'm just it's good to be here. What I want to make sure, can everyone see the screen? Brilliant, excellent. Right, so what I want to make sure is if this is 10 minutes, so I've got an even shorter whistle stop, so I've got to go quick on this. But I want to make sure it's understandable and it's plain English, so I'm going to take it back to that. And there's a few crossovers which I'll jump over just to make sure. But I'm going to be trying to look at the financing of the EV fleet and the additional fuel and tax benefits that can be achieved. But I want it to really focus in on the benefit you can get from running it within your business, basically. So, but first of all, I want to take it away from the finance just to get the underlying reasons for doing it, because it will drive through on the message as we go. So first screen really is the well-to-tank reason. Now, obviously, well-to-tank doesn't make exact sense for the electrics, but when you look at fossil fuels, they've got to draw the fuel, they've got to refine it, they've got to deliver it to the stations, and the cars have got to collect the fuel and go. When you're talking biofuels, it's the same. When you're talking electricity, they've got to dig it up, or in more cases nowadays, 70% of the time it's using renewable energies. They've got to take it and generate it, but then it goes directly to the vehicle via power lines and obviously your systems that Emma fits. But ultimately, the vehicles are more recyclable. The vehicles are more efficient. There's less moving parts, so there's less servicing needed. So the whole cycle, and when you magnify it over all the vehicles in the UK and across the world, the case for the electric becomes a no-brainer in terms of the reduction of the CO2 and the well-to-real reasons for having it, which is why governments are driving that forward. But if we put that in addition with the direct transmission as well, a vehicle goes from 0 to power on an electric vehicle immediately. You've got immediate torque, whereas an internal combustion engine or an ICE has an explosion in the engine and drives power through and reduces again. So you've got more wear and tear. You've got a less inconsistent power load that you've got with the electric vehicles, much smoother, more responsive, and it means it can probably avoid more accidents, but gets less wear and tear in the action as well. And to couple that with the gearbox as well, it's direct transmission again in an electric vehicle, being a motor, but you've got gear changes in a car. So as you go through the gears, as you look in the bottom right-hand corner chart, you see power change as you go through the gears. Whereas if you've got an electric vehicle, it's a smooth transition up through the power. Now that means it's a better drive. It means it's smoother when it's carrying stuff, but also again, the wear and tear on the vehicle is lower. So, and there's reasons I mention that from the finance perspective later, but it means there's always good reasons. But more importantly, there's a better experience for your drivers as well. So that actually, when you drive all that through, there's soft benefits and there's firm benefits as you do it. So just bear that in mind as we're taking it through to the next stages. But as why I'm here is actually to talk about the financial side. So I'm going to show you 5 reasons: cheaper driving, less tax and finance, lower servicing costs, happier drivers, and the perception of your business brand as well. So let's start with the cheaper driving. So cheaper driving on grants, I'm not going to cover those because I've covered earlier. Fueling, only touch on it because that was covered as well, but parking and the emission zones as well, which was glanced on. So this is point 1. So I'm just going to jump over the grants. But the fueling, the point I'm going to touch on fueling is, let's take the first vehicle, the Audi e-tron on the top of the list. That is a high expense vehicle, a heavy vehicle, but an electric vehicle. And if you move across the bars to the cost per mile, it's 5.9 pence per mile on the electric charge that's actually drawn through it. If we take that over to what petrol and diesel normally is, and a typical electric is 2 to 4 pence per mile. A diesel is typically 9 to 11 pence per mile. A petrol is typically 11 to 14. So even with a 5.97 pence per mile on a heavy luxury Audi e-tron, you're about 3/4 to a third. It's about a third of the price to a quarter of the price of the mileage. So if you do reasonable mileage, and you can do in this vehicle, because notice the range is 186, you start to drive savings on those mileages. So it is worth doing that. I'm going to skip over on this again, but keep that in mind, and you will get these slides as well. To actually get more information on it. I have put a link on it to the fuel costs as well, just so you can see examples of fuel costs as well. But again, I'm not going to talk about charging because Emma will know way more about it than I do. But what I want to show is how easy it is to get the information, because Zap Maps was talked about very briefly in the very first presentation. But download the app. You've got every charger in the UK on the maps. You've got access to the public charging points. If you're charging externally to your home, bear in mind 80% of charging happens at home on average, but if you need to use external charging points, get a membership with one of the suppliers that are on site, because that reduces the cost of the external charging as well. So they're easy to locate, the charging points, but there are schemes available to drive that cost down, so it makes the ease and the cost of driving cheaper. And bear in mind, you're comparing it to your combustion vehicle. And when we get to the whole life cost in a moment, you'll see why this makes a big difference. But I'm not going to focus on charging, but I'm going to focus on parking. Parking anywhere in the UK is very easy with an electric vehicle because you've got access to the normal parking points. But you've also got hundreds of electric parking points. They tend to come with charging zones available to them as well. But parking is often free. But if you're going for commercial parking, Q Parks, for instance, has a 25% parking reduction on their parking, and it's similar for all the major parking companies as well. So if you have to park in cities for your business, you are almost inevitably going to be saving 25% of your parking costs and more, because you'll find free zones as well. So, finding parking is much easier with electrics than it is when you're doing standard, with the standard combustion engines. Emission zones won't jump through the stuff that's already been covered, but bear in mind there are 2 emission zones in the UK at the moment, because everyone forgets Norwich has a restricted buses zone, and that probably will be expanded later. But also, don't forget Birmingham on the 1st of June 2021 will be an emission zone, and it was been delayed in the past, and it is coming. So if you do work from Birmingham, click on the link at the bottom of this screen, see what your current car costs you when you go into the emission zones. But also bear in mind, if you've got a 100% clean, zero CO2 vehicle, you've got access to the clean air zones of Birmingham when they come up as well. So again, it's savings. If you have regular trips into the clean air zones, you need to look at how much that's going to be costing you as an overall life cost of the vehicle. So now we come into the bit which you probably wanted me to do. So it's the less tax and finance. I bet you're looking forward to this, which is the whole life costs, the excise duties and the benefit in kinds to the drivers themselves. So first of all, I've done four different vehicles. When you look at this screen, I know it looks like a clutter of numbers. It's actually, what I'm trying to show you is the case for electric on the initial rentals doesn't show a very clear reason as to why you go electric. But the case, as you drive through, and you'll see this in a moment, it becomes vastly important. Notice that car 1 is the electric, and then it goes to the hybrid, the diesel, and then the petrol at the bottom. And actually, the most expensive car on the base rental is actually the e-tron, which is the electric. I've picked Audi Q7s for the rest to be the similars. But the petrol is actually the cheapest on the rental. I've picked high expense vehicles so you can see the difference in the price more clearly. What I would say though is the case is difficult to see now, but we're not using whole life cost as mentioned at the start. So I'm just going to give you a quick example of a whole life cost. This is a random vehicle. It is a real vehicle, but I haven't told you which one it is, just to give you a clue. But the orange is the rental that you'll often see on a website, £215.35. As you can see, it's just over a third of the cost of the vehicles from what we see. It doesn't include accessories, servicing, tyres, breakdown, VAT, fuel spend, insurance, so on and so on. But if you include everything, including the employee's benefit in kind, if you include that, your total true cost of that speculative vehicle is £575.19. It's the whole cost. It's the true cost of the vehicle. It's what the business and the employees are going to be costed to run that vehicle. So the base rental was £215, and even if you included accessories, servicing, tyres, breakdown, and VAT, you're only a fraction over half the cost of that vehicle. So you do bear that in mind. I'm going to put it now back into a vehicle, the original 4 vehicles using a whole life cost calculation. Now again, you're going to see this is going to be difficult to see. So the bit to look at is the e-tron's the one at the top at 78,995p11d. That's taxable value. And at the bottom is the petrol Q7 at 58,000. So there's £20,000 of taxable value difference between the two. But if you jump right the way over to the right-hand side at the total whole life cost, now it starts to become clear. This is including the fuel spend, the national insurance contribution, and taking into account the benefit in kind as well. But the total whole life cost of the electric is now £1,056.45 per month. And the petrol, which is £20,000 taxable difference, is £1,313.84 a month. And that is not taking into account parking benefits, insurance incentives, charging point incentives, happier drivers from the motoring benefit of having a better vehicle, and the availability of the onboard management systems that come with these vehicles. These will all generate green credentials. So if you take this one vehicle and multiply it by your fleet, think about the savings that come in from vehicle to vehicle to vehicle over your fleet. So it starts to become a no-brainer when you look at the additional costs that the vehicles generate over the fleet. And the reason is you've got grants and you've got a holding value, especially if you're doing contract hire or a similar method where you're looking at the holding value of the vehicle and the residual value and the purchase price at the front end. The bit in between is the contract hire. So you're actually sustaining a better valued vehicle. So looking at whole life costs, you start to see the true value of this vehicle. But I know I'm running over a little bit, so I'm just going to cover a couple more slides and then I'll call back on it. But let's look at the benefit in kind and taxable benefits. If you notice, so the benefit in kind on the right-hand side of the screen has a new bar in it, and it's the electric vehicle range. Any vehicle under 50 CO2 has to be a hybrid in theory at the moment. So under 50 CO2, it starts to look at the mileages. So your full electric range, say it's 45 miles and it's 44 CO2, you're looking at 8% tax. If that 44 CO2 became 52 CO2, you're paying 15% tax. So the CO2 and the mileage range are really important. So you need to look at you're getting the most mileage range vehicle you can when you're looking at it. A full electric is 0% on the bar, basically. But on top of that, if you've got a zero CO2 vehicle, the business has zero tax for vehicles under £40,000. And a bit that people forget is electricity has a VAT of 5%, whereas petrol and diesel has a VAT of 20%. So even by the tax levels, you're paying less for your fuel, and there's additional charges on the import of fuel as well, if you bear that in mind. So, and then if your employees are drawing power from the company charging points, there's no benefit in kind for their personal driving mileages while they're doing it. So you've got additional driver benefits when you're driving it, which means happier drivers again. So I'm going to skip on that part because we've covered it, but the last bit I'm going to cover, and then I'll break because I've run over time, is the SMR. Now, the SMR means service, maintenance, and repair. So, what are the costs of a combustion engine service? Well, it's the oil change, it's the diesel injectors, the particulate filters, the catalytic converters, the gearbox, the clutch. An electric vehicle doesn't contain any of those parts. So, the servicing is often around 35% lower on the electric vehicles. So if you are getting electrics, you are driving down those costs again. It's the additional costs around the vehicle. And bear in mind, the electrics are similarly priced on the rentals. So we are getting there to a point. And just to couple that, I'm going to just skip over. Downtime comes with that. Downtime is when vehicles stop working. It's unexpected, usually unplannable, costly, it's disruptive. I'll give you an example. British Gas, which I was involved with in 2016, they piloted 500 Nissan ENV200 vans to see the future viability of electric. Then, 12 months' time of doing that pilot, not a single vehicle had broken down within that scheme. So that would have been unheard of in a petrol or a diesel fleet. They had looked at the right vehicles, they looked at the right distribution routes, they knew their companies well. Their drivers drove better because they were monitoring them. The drivers drove better, which meant less accidents, less damage. They looked after their vehicles better. And that all drives through. I'll skip through for the final bit. Having the better behaviours drives through to a better perception of your fleet, which means marketable green credentials. You can get awarded awards, which will drive through to getting better tenders, because there's a lot of green aware companies out there that want you to look that better fleet. You can prove the value of having the green fleet, and it will mean your drivers will be working with you, and it means that the results of the business mean cheaper driving, less accidents, less damage, and a greener fleet. So that's essentially the case that I've got. I know I ran over a little bit, I apologise, but any questions?
Yeah, we've got a few questions being posted on the chat. Thanks for that, Richard, and thanks to all the speakers for cramming in quite a lot into a short space of time. There's one from Thomas Williams about basic grants for charging points.
Yep.
I think one of you mentioned the £350 workplace charger grant, didn't you? Is that per socket or per charger unit, or?
Emma, do you want to take, or shall I take that?
It is per socket. There's a workplace charging grants at the moment, and it does change, but at the moment it's £350 subsidy per socket, and that's up to 40 sockets, and that can actually be on more than one site if required.
It can be different periods of time as well, isn't it? So you can install some and then go back later and put a second application in.
Yeah, and I think that is managed through the actual procurement process. So, you know, if it was through Emma, she would, you know, put that into the cost of the thing, so you've not actually got the hassle of having to claim it.
And there's certain models which are accredited to that OLEV grant scheme. So there's a lot of them, but you have to choose one that's accredited in order to get the grant.
Yeah.
Okay. And there was a question about storage options, sort of linking them to solar panels. Anybody want to comment on battery storage?
Yeah, it's an increasing, as I said before, you know, it's an area where it's a viable option for use, second life use of batteries. I've actually working for Cenex. I'm part of a scheme. So my house at the moment, I've got a battery storage linked with solar, linked with a vehicle to grid. So I'm getting the best of everything. So I'm generating power that goes into the car, that goes back into the grid. But yeah, it's a good way of helping. I think what Emma said, helping, you know, if you can generate electricity as well, it helps with the overall capacity, and in terms of giving you the flexibility in terms of the amount of vehicles that you can actually charge at any one point. So it's and actually it can also provide an income stream. Vehicle to grid is something that's developing at a pace, but not sort of commercially available at the moment, but it will be before too soon, and that helps manage the grid as well.
We're in the very initial stages of an install at the moment, and we're doing the electricity supply, not the chargers. We start before the chargers, but what they're doing is electric vehicle chargers under a solar canopy, and then that solar canopy then connects to battery storage, electrical supply to that, and with anything like PV, because it can also export, you have to ensure that when you apply for the connection from the DNO that they take into account any export as well as import, because they do that. But yeah, definitely possible.
Okay, there was a question from me about, so basically, is there a kind of annual mileage threshold where electric vehicles become lower whole life cost than an internal combustion engine? Is there a kind of threshold? Or
Depends on the vehicle, Simon. I mean, in round terms, if you're looking at a car, I always use the word sweet spot. So ideally, you know, I've got a Leaf that's got a 40 kilowatt battery. I've got a realistic range of about 120 to 140 miles, depending on weather and the way I drive it. So if I was doing up to that, so at about 100 miles a day, for example, I'm maximizing the fuel savings. And I think from what, you know, Richard said, that's what then, if you look at it then over a 2-3 year period that you own the car, by doing that, you're maximizing or reducing that whole life cost.
Could I take that a bit further as well? Because I think
Yeah.
absolutely right with that. If you, it's less about the distance you do. Actually, it's more about the behaviour of the drive. So you need to learn to drive an electric in a slightly different way, because it's regenerating power. And also, if you're an ultra city driver, in terms of you're in the middle of the city, you're going to get better value out of the electric driving. Doesn't mean you don't get it elsewhere, by the way, but it's the stop-start on a combustion engine with the explosions, with the damp, you know, there's wear and tear done to the vehicle, and there's also more consumption of fuel done, and also obviously it's just the behaviour of having the pollution that's outside of the work, you know, the working environments as well. So, but you'll find that it depends on the vehicle, because if you take a Golf E, for instance, currently Golf E's are actually cheaper on the rental because of the grants and the extra add-ons than the standard Golfs, basically. So you can get a cheaper vehicle that runs cheaper, if you see what I mean. So the sweet spot is already at day one, if you see what I mean, from a vehicle from that perspective. So it's about how you use the vehicle and how you purchase the vehicle, if you see what I mean. So is it the right vehicle for you? And in most cases now, there's an option for every situation, as far as I can tell now. So this is the point of change I see in the market, and
it can actually not stack up if you've got a vehicle that, you know, working with fleets and things where you might see vehicles that do 10 miles a day. Well, actually, it's very difficult then to replace that vehicle like for like with electric to gain the savings over the fuel. So it's, you know, those are the sort of examples.
Yeah.
But there's an interesting the LDV Maxus coming out. Well, for instance, the vans tend to have a lower mileage range because they're heavier vehicles, which mean batteries have to be bigger to move them in effect. But the LDV Maxus is the first chassis, pure chassis build. So the drivetrain has been built for electrics. So it's lighter, the balance is better, it drives better, and the other manufacturers will follow. But LDV is the first to have it purely built around that behaviour. So you'll find that they'll keep improving as well. So at the moment, I think we're at that threshold, but I think they'll keep improving because at the moment they're using chassis built for combustion engines, which are heavier, which tend to sit at the front, but you can balance them out better now as well. So, but I think that answers it.
Does anybody else have any questions they want to shout out? I haven't written a question yet. No.
Richard, you know the calculations you put down, are they based on the perceived miles from the car manufacturer, or so I know, like I own an electric vehicle, and like you said, the mileage depends on the way you drive, where you're driving. So obviously driving on a motorway, you get less range than driving around town.
What car's quite good at this, actually, strangely enough, the real mileages. Now, yes, you're absolutely right. Behaviour of driving entirely changes the distances you achieve. Now, I did a little bit of work for a organisation that doesn't exist in the same format now, which was called Centro, which is now Network over in Birmingham. Centro had anxiety on taking a note good couple of years ago, and I had access to drive it, so I drove it to them as a demonstration. And they wanted to know about range anxiety, which is less of a thing now because that had about 100 miles at that point, basically. So I put all the power on. It was a rainy day. I had all the heating on to max, had all the windows down, turned the sound up to max, and I went from about a 20-mile journey, and I had about 6 miles of power left in the vehicle when I got there. So, and bear in mind, I overpowered it in every situation I could think of all the way down. And I was starting to worry because I'm going through the city centre of Birmingham at this stage, because I'm like, maybe I've overdone it. But what I wanted to show them is, you're right, range anxiety can be a thing, but what I would have got there with probably about 15 miles of the range gone if I'd done it correctly, if you see what I mean. And that's the, so it would, and bear in mind the mileages have gone up now, and you do not charge your vehicle to max, not often, because you can charge it 80% in about half an hour on a good charger, but the rest of the rapid charge, it slows up at the end because you don't want to damage your battery, and the charger knows that. So you don't fill your tank up every single day. You leave it on the drive and you use your journeys. So you drive it like a normal car. Think of it like a normal charge, like a normal fuel tank in that sense. You take it to about 80 and keep it more or less midway charge, because you're not going to go 200 miles in a day. You're not going to, in all honesty, the mileages are good enough, and they'll keep getting better as the range goes. So I hope that helps. Does that answer it somewhat?
Yeah, because I was just sort of looking at perspective if I was to advise a client that was a haulage company that does sort of little trips in and out of town, sort of measuring that that saving, not knowing the behaviour of the driver.
That's the thing. I would suggest, if you start, certainly in the early days, is make a review of your business as you take the electric vehicles on. Driver behaviours absolutely change when they know you're watching them, but do it in a positive way. You're doing it to make the fleet better, to get them better vehicles, to make it all more efficient, to put them more in control of certain areas. The moment they know that's happening, the behaviours improve, and then you report on the behaviours to them, say, whatever you're doing, and you need to find out what it is making the drive better. You're saving the business money doing this.
Provide it as training. I've found from my own experience, when people see an electric vehicle, they're frightened to death of it and think it's a spaceship. And actually it's not. If you can drive an automatic, you can drive an electric. And actually I've had examples of where, again, when I was working at Nissan and dealing with local authorities and fleet managers and some of the guys who were using certainly the vans day in, day out, to sit with them the first time they drive an electric van, to see their reaction is great, because they just think, hang on a minute, all of these myths and perceptions they've got around electric disappear in an instant. It's it's all about training and making sure that you know, you can support them in terms of that transition.
Okay.
Right. Well, thanks very much. Thanks again to the speakers, and thanks to everybody who's joined us. Hope you find some use out of that. And yeah, hopefully see you next time. We'll obviously let everybody know when the next event will be arranged. Probably in about 3 months' time. So probably end of March, early April. And thanks so much. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheerio.
Thank you.
Thank you.